In the name of God, amen. As the last lights of Christmas flicker and the Epiphany star rises, we find ourselves once again at a sacred threshold. Our creche scenes stand nearly completed. Mary and Joseph watching over the Christ child, shepherds kneeling in wonder, yet empty spaces remain, awaiting tomorrow's arrival of the Magi. These final editions will transform our nativity from a local story into a universal one. This transition invites us to think about how divine revelation unfolds gradually, like dawn breaking over our city's fog-shrouded hills. In this space between Christmas and Epiphany, Jeremiah speaks with particular power. The Hebrew word hinenei, behold, or here I am, marks a moment of divine initiative, of God breaking into history anew. Just as we stand between two feast days, Jeremiah's audience stood between exile and restoration, between lamentation and joy. The prophet's vision reminds us that God is often revealed most clearly in these in-between times, when we're poised between what has been and what will be. These threshold moments become sacred spaces where divine revelation takes root and flourishes. Consider the audacity of Jeremiah's prophecy. Save, O Lord, your people, the remnant of Israel. He spoke these words to a community that was shattered by displacement. The northern kingdom had fallen to Assyria, and Judah was facing a Babylonian threat. This wasn't merely political upheaval, but a crisis that challenged their very understanding of their covenant with God. The temple, the physical embodiment of God's presence among them, laid in ruins. Their promised land was occupied, and their communities were scattered. Yet through Jeremiah, God promises not just restoration, but celebration. Sing aloud with gladness. The inclusivity of this divine homecoming speaks to us here in this time and in this place. When Jeremiah proclaims that the blind and the lame, those with child and those in labor will be a part of the return, he's naming those typically left behind on ancient journeys. Those who couldn't keep up, who maybe couldn't carry their share, who couldn't contribute to the community's survival in conventional ways. Those on the fringes. Here and now, where tech workers and taxi drivers share the streets, where expensive homes are nestled next to homeless encampments, who are we leaving behind? Whose gifts go unrecognized? Our geographic position at the edge of a continent, this city of arrivals and departures, gives many of us unique insight into what it means to be far from home. We see daily how displacement and belonging shape our common life. Like Jeremiah's audience, many in our community know the pain of separation and the hope of restoration. This brings us to Matthew's account of the Magi, those Eastern scholars who were outsiders in every way. Foreigners, Gentiles, astronomers rather than scholars of the Torah, yet God's light shone for them too. Their presence in our nativity scenes remind us that divine love transcends human boundaries. Their journey reminds us that sometimes the most meaningful spiritual insights come from unexpected sources, from those our communities may consider peripheral or maybe irrelevant. The Epiphany, the manifestation, gains fresh urgency in our context. These 12 days of Christmas have invited us to contemplate the mystery of the Incarnation, God taking on human flesh, divine revelation in its most intimate form. Now, as we prepare for Epiphany, we are witnesses to this revelation expanding outward. The Magi, ancient scientists seeking understanding through careful observation, remind us that outsiders can often recognize divine truth, sometimes before insiders do. Their astronomical expertise, foreign to ancient Jewish tradition, became the very means by which God led them to the Christ child. Our liturgical journey mirrors theirs. As they followed the star through long nights, we've journeyed through Advent's darkness and into the Christmas light. As they brought gifts recognizing Jesus as God and mortal, we too have pondered the Incarnation's full meaning. And just as they left for their own country by another road, we too will soon leave this season, transformed by our encounter with divine revelation. This transformation demands response. Not just personal spiritual growth, but active engagement with our community's needs. Now, more than ever, we must speak up. Today's threshold moment also carries incredible sacramental significance as well. At each celebration of the Eucharist, we bring gifts like the Magi, bread and wine, echoing their gold and frankincense. Like their myrrh, our offerings point towards both death and resurrection. When Jeremiah speaks of grain, wine, and oil, he's naming not just agricultural products, but the ancient roots of our sacramental life. These weren't merely commodities, but symbols of God's provision through the land itself, signs of the deep connection between physical sustenance and spiritual nourishment. In breaking bread together, we connect our story to Israel's story, to the Magi's story, to God's unfolding narrative of love. In these waning days of Christmas, as holiday decorations come down and Christmas trees appear on the sidewalks, ready to be taken away and disposed of, we may feel tension between the secular calendar's rush and the church's invitation to linger in this moment. Yet this tension itself carries weight. Like Jeremiah's promise of restoration or the Magi's star, God's revelation often requires patient attention, a willingness to dwell in those in-between places. In our fast-paced world of instant notifications and constant updates, this call to patient attention becomes increasingly countercultural and increasingly necessary. Tomorrow's Epiphany feast completes one liturgical journey and begins another. The question before us is, how will these revelations change us? How will they shape our journey forward? We live in a world marked by stark contrasts of wealth and poverty, of belonging and displacement. How will we embody God's inclusive love? The Magi's gifts acknowledge Jesus as God and mortal. How do our own gifts and actions acknowledge Christ's presence in our midst, especially in those who are so often overlooked? These texts call us to a renewed vision of community, one where, like the Magi, we're willing to cross boundaries in search of truth. Where, like Jeremiah's restored people, we ensure no one is left behind. Where, like the shepherds, we're ready to be surprised by God's appearance in unexpected places and people. This vision requires both contemplation and action, both personal transformation and social engagement. May this threshold moment sharpen our attention to divine revelation in all of its forms. May we, like the Magi, have wisdom to recognize God's light wherever it appears. May we, like Jeremiah's restored community, become living witnesses to God's transforming power in our communities and beyond. May we find courage to cross boundaries and to create spaces where all can experience God's divine presence. May the God who led the Magi by a star guide us in our journey. And may we, like those ancient travelers, find overwhelming joy in unexpected places and share it with everyone that we meet. Amen.